Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dynasty After Dark. We're your hosts, Calvin Timms, Steve Dale Terry. You can find us over on Twitter at TDC_Calvin and at Dynasty Dale. We're going through our full NFL offseason recap. All 32 teams. We're dropping one a day for the entire month of July. We appreciate you guys joining us for this one. If you're a first-time listener, thanks for checking us out. We appreciate it. If you're coming back each and every day, we appreciate you guys too. So, that said, we're going to be talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars here today. Before we get into them, if you can, really quickly, just subscribe to the channel, like, comment on the video. There's a lot of people that have been checking these videos out, and if you can, just leave a like and a comment. It takes about 10 seconds, and it just really helps us with the YouTube or Spotify algorithm. People really appreciate it. We're just trying to grow the podcast. We're just a couple guys having fun talking fantasy football. So that said, Dale, how are we doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. I'm excited to talk about this team today because it should be a very interesting recap.
Right. I mean, they're primed for the AFC South, right? They're
primed and ready.
Favorites.
Yep.
So we'll see how they can do. But yeah, the Jaguars, they won last year, right? And then they won a miraculous playoff game. Easy. You love to see that. It was a good game. I mean, it really was. I'm shocked Brandon Staley didn't get fired for it, but it is what
Agreed.
it is.
Agreed.
But yeah, Jaguars definitely looking up. A lot of people are excited about the team. Doug Peterson looks like the guy there. And I think I'm excited to see what he can do with this. So that said, if this is your first time, the way we kind of break this down, we're going to talk through any coaching changes. Obviously, there were no major coaching changes. You guys found the guy in Doug Peterson last year, so he was able to keep he calls most of the plays anyway, so it doesn't really change too much. Again, why offensive coaches are better than defensive coaches, but it is what it is. But same defensive coordinator, same OC, so nothing major there. Now we're going to talk about some of the free agents that they lost. We're going to recap all of them, but the guys that they lost, the guys that they added, and the guys they added in the draft as well. And then at the end of the video, we're going to talk about the positional rankings and recap of all those guys as well. So, yeah, it's going to be a fun one. But Dale, any last thoughts before we jump into it?
I am ready to be neck deep in Duval County. I'm excited.
There we go. All right. So obviously last year, we'll talk about this really quickly, but they did trade for Calvin Ridley. It was technically 2022, but we'll kind of count it in the offseason here. That's going to be a big impact, especially for Dynasty. A lot of people are either all in or all out on Calvin Ridley right now. We'll talk about his value here in just a little bit. But yeah, that is one of the most convoluted trades. I think it could be anywhere from a 5th round pick. It was a conditional pick, right? And it could be anywhere from a 5th to a 1st or a 2nd, I think. And
I think a 2nd. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it was a big one, but we'll see what it ultimately pans out to be this year. I like the trade personally, especially with where they were picking in the draft. There wasn't really a lot of guys that they could go and get in the draft, because they beat the Chargers. Chargers picked ahead of them, and that whole run of wide receivers was right before their pick. So pretty wild right there. All right, so some of the guys that they re-signed or added this year, we'll go position by position. Starting with cornerback Trey Herndon, they re-signed him. Defensive end Adam Godis, they re-signed him as well. Michael Dogby, another DE that they brought in from Arizona. Henry Mondu, that's a cool name. Defensive end from the Giants. And I apologize, guys, if you haven't listened to the last one yet. I still have a little bit of a cold that's going on, so my voice is a little bit scratchy and my throat kind of sucks. So if you guys hear me with any if I sound weird, just forgive me. But they also brought in kicker Brandon McManus. I like this a lot. I actually like Brandon McManus for this team. He's a good kicker in my opinion. They brought in Dearness Johnson, running back from Cleveland. They have brought in right tackle Josh Wells from Tampa Bay. Re-signed Andrew Wingard, safety. Brought in, or they, and that was pretty much it. So yeah, that's all the additions that they made. Very, very quiet offseason in terms of
Mm-hmm.
the free agents.
Extremely quiet.
Yeah, I think they did most of their work last year, if we're being honest, in
Mm-hmm.
2022. So, yeah, they didn't have a ton of cap space, so they kind of kept it to the guys that they really wanted to go and get. And I mean, when you're paying, yeah, you're not really paying a lot towards a lot of these guys, but you're really trying to build that cap back up this offseason. Any thoughts on these guys?
It's I think the only one of note that we talked about was with the trade with Calvin Ridley. Honestly, other than
Mhm.
that, like nobody's really. I do like Dearness Johnston or Johnson, excuse me.
Right,
I do like him. I think he did really well in Cleveland last year,
right.
and he was able to spell Nick Chubb quite a bit, and play really well. But it's gonna be interesting to see his role in the offense, especially after they drafted a running back and then also have a first round draft pick, in that running back room. So it's gonna be interesting to see his role.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And this is one of those things. Like, there's always the argument, right? Should you have the draft before free agency before the draft?
Um,
And the argument is always, well, free agents would get screwed because if it's after the draft, you're signing these guys to potentially fill holes, so they're going to get paid nothing. But I mean, you got guys that coming in here for $1 million, $2 million. Like, is it really going to be
mhm.
that much less money? I don't
Not
know. I
really.
personally don't think so, um, but yeah, now there's a lot of talk about Dearness Johnson, for example, being the number 2 guy here behind Travis
Mhm.
Etienne.
Absolutely.
But they signed him before they drafted Tank Bigsby. So if he was really the number 2, would they draft Tank Bigsby as highly as they did? I don't really know. So it just leads to these dumb questions, in my opinion. So yeah, flipping it around would have a little bit of benefits, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it could, but I think it's better for the veterans that are already in the league and established to kind of get the first stab at stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, if you changed it, I would not be sad, but I can also see the argument for keeping it as it is. So, all right. So, a few guys that they lost as well. Not, I gotta say, I'm impressed. Jacksonville. I wish all teams were like you. No coaching staff changes. Very few free agent signings. It makes our
Hmm.
job so much easier. We get more time to
Easier,
talk
yeah.
about the actual players here. But Shaquille Griffin, cornerback, they lost him this last offseason. They lost Arden Key, linebacker. They lost Jawan Taylor. This was the big loss. The Chiefs signed him
Yes.
for a 4-year, $80 million contract. Crazy. They lost Chris Manhertz, tight end, and Dan Arnold, another tight end there. And then Marvin Jones, wide receiver. Those guys have all been signed by other teams. The guys that they've lost that they haven't signed anywhere yet, which means they could be back with this team, but we just don't know yet. Dewan Smoot, defensive end. Corey Peters, defensive tackle. Offensive tackle, Brandon Murphy. And then Willie Johnson. So those guys are all still free agents out there unsigned. So we don't know where they're going to land, but we'll see. Any thoughts on the guys that they lost? Again, it was pretty small.
Yeah, it wasn't anybody of note. I think it's an interesting one is Marvin Jones because I felt at times he was Lawrence's safety net at
Right.
times.
Yeah.
But I think
35
they
year
have
old
enough.
Marvin Jones.
He's only 33. Calm down.
Yep.
But no, I agree. So it not really any. I mean other than Juwan Taylor, that I think that was a huge loss. But they did get somebody in the draft to hopefully replace him. But they do have a I think Cam Robinson went down last year with an ACL injury.
Yes, it does sound right.
So that's something to look out for. So their offensive line isn't going to be fully healthy this year.
Right.
So that's something to look out for if you are a Lawrence owner or ETN or any of these wide receivers.
Right. Yep. So, in the actual draft, though, like you mentioned, they tried to replace Jawan Taylor with Anton Harrison, their first round pick from Oklahoma. This was interesting. They traded back twice, just a couple spots both times, just to pick up a little bit of extra capital. So you like to see that. Picked Anton Harrison at 27 overall. In round 2, They picked tight end Brenton Strange out of Penn State. I didn't like this at all.
Strange pick.
Yeah, it
Strange
was
pick.
dumb. Well, he's just a blocking tight end, in my opinion. Like, why are we
Well,
wasting?
then why not take Darnell Washington?
Yeah, I know, right? It was odd. It really
I know.
was.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I know.
Especially with Doug Peterson's track record. Like, Darnell Washington was just made so much more sense. But it just kind of goes back to Trent Baalke. This is just a straight up Baalke pick, right? In round 3, their third overall pick, they took Tank Bigsby out of Auburn, running back. In round 4, they took Ventrell Miller, linebacker out of Florida. They also took Tyler Lacey, defensive end out of Oklahoma State. In round 5, they took Yasir Abdullah, linebacker out of Louisville. They also took Antonio Johnson, safety out of Texas A&M. Round 6, they took Parker Washington, wide receiver out of Penn State. Low-key, really like this personally.
Hmm.
We'll talk about him here in just a minute. Christian Braswell, cornerback out of Rutgers. Eric Howlett, safety out of Pittsburgh. And then in round 7, they wrapped it up with Cooper Hodges, guard out of Appalachian State. Raymond Vahesek, defensive tackle out of North Carolina. And Derek Parrish, fullback out of Houston. So, yeah, some good picks personally. I like
Yeah.
some of their additions here. I wish guys like Parker Washington would have gotten a little bit higher, but he fell in the 6th, and we'll see if he can become something. But I like the talent of this kid coming out. So, what are your thoughts on the draft here?
Agreed. I mean, I'm not a huge bulky guy either. I think a lot of these guys are, ironically enough, just a bunch of Jags.
Sure.
Ironically, I think they're potential fillers. Like, I don't see necessarily any starters. I never really thought Parker Washington was going to be a wide receiver 2 starter.
Yeah, he was
You
always kind
know,
of a flex guy, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
potential.
So I mean, I do like them getting Anton Harris out of Oklahoma. Like, he was a pretty big riser
Yeah.
in
Sure.
there, and I think the Bigsby is interesting.
Yep.
I'll just say that
Yep.
it's interesting.
Yep.
It's interesting.
We'll talk about the running backs here in just a minute,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, all in all, some ups, some downs, typical Trent Baalke draft. It felt
yup,
like,
yup,
Baalke's always makes me laugh because it's like he nails some picks and then he just completely whiffs on others. And you're like,
yes.
what are we seeing here, man? Like, it's just crazy to
It's
me, but
wild. It's wild.
you live and you die by the
Whatever.
Baalke, right? So,
Yeah,
and he's not going anywhere. He's like Shad Khan's best friend. So,
which is unfortunate for
right.
uh, the Jags fan that's out there.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so offensive line again, I think it should be a little bit better. Cam Robinson should be healthy. They have Brandon Scherf, who they paid a ton of money last year. They got Anton Harrison, who's going to be the right tackle, but should be a little bit better. I do like this offensive line, and that's what Doug Peterson's always kind of prioritized is O-line, and I think that's a good. It's in a good direction, right? I don't think it's going to be an elite group of guys, but I think it's going to be very, very solid, and it's going to be good enough, right? Do you disagree?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think with them getting Brandon Scherf last year, and a couple of these other pieces to really shore up the offensive line, that's going to help out. So,
Yep.
um, yeah, I'm not super worried about it. And plus, Trevor Lawrence is mobile enough to
Yeah,
get away if
definitely.
needed.
Yep, with you. Now, obviously, Trevor Lawrence is the quarterback. Not much to talk about here, honestly, because Trevor Lawrence is just, he's kind of the guy, and you like to see that.
Hmm.
Some of these places you have guys that are you have to talk about, 'em, you have to discuss them, right? And who's going to be the guy or who's going to be the starter? I'm so ready to talk about San Francisco. This is sarcasm, by the way, but yeah, Trevor Lawrence, he's a good player. He's been rising. I think he's the dynasty quarterback number 7 right now, 7 or 8. So you love to see that kind of living up to what he was drafted to be. He was the far and away number 1 draft pick in the 2021 rookie drafts, right? So, but yeah, you talk about his mobility. Last year he had 291 rushing yards. The year before, 334. Not amazing, but not bad by any means. So, and he's got it in there. It's just you need to see a little bit more of it, hopefully for fantasy. But he did finish as quarterback number 8 last year, so
Hmm.
you can't complain too much there.
Yeah, I think a lot of his work came the back half of the year, to be honest.
Yeah,
In the beginning of the year, he had a couple good games, but it was a lot of ups and
yeah.
downs and
He
stuff
got a
like
lot
that.
more
So
consistent right after the bye.
yes, yes. So it's with that. Like, do you think he's going to take? I mean, he kind of took that step last year to become a more consistent player. Like, do you think he's going to take another step forward and become this? I don't want to use the word. I don't want to use like a Joe Burrow type, but like a more like the is he going to submit himself as that generational talent?
I can see it. I can. I mean, the entire team is built around him, right? And
Right.
if it's going to happen, it's going to be this year. But it's always risky just
Yep.
banking on it to happen, I guess. But no, I definitely can see the path to it for sure. So he did that against some good defenses too in the second half. I mean, Kansas City, they're not an elite defense, but they're always good,
Hmm.
right? He had 21 points against them, 26 against Baltimore. Detroit in the second half was pretty good. Still had 17 points there. Um, 34 against Tennessee. They're always a tough defense. 28
Right.
against Dallas. The Jets, he had 19
Sounds pretty
points.
good.
So yeah, he was pretty solid.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing for him is getting his passing touchdowns up because he
Yeah, he
only
had
had 25
25.
last year,
Right.
which for him finishing quarterback 8 is seems pretty low, to be
Yeah, but
honest.
he had over 4,000 yards. So,
Yep.
and I could definitely see that definitely taking a step up this upcoming season. So, yeah, Trevor Lawrence still a good player. I think that he definitely, if you're going to invest in Trevor Lawrence, your window is closing because if he does look like he did at the second half of last season, his value is just going to be astronomical. You're never going to have a chance to get him again, right? So if you're going to go
Yes.
and get him now. Now, jumping over to the running backs here, this last year was Travis Etienne's basically his first year, right? Because
Yep.
he missed the entire rookie season with the Liz Frank injury.
Yep.
And I got to say, I don't know how to feel about Travis Etienne. He finished as the running back number 17. I actually watched a video. They talked about how Urban Meyer basically catfished the entire fantasy community on Travis Etienne, saying that he's a pass catching guy and
Yeah.
how he's going to be utilizing that role and everything. He only had 45 targets last year with 35 catches. So he played 17 games, and I get it. There's some games where he didn't play a large number of snaps, but he had 220 carries and only 45 targets. Like, uh, not great for that, but that's where I think that someone like Tank Bigsby can come in and have a massive potential role because what do we know about Doug Peterson? And I'm not going to get into these running backs too much because I put out my most popular YouTube video of all time, I guess, was Tank Bigsby versus Travis Etienne, and I gave all
Hmm.
my thoughts on these two guys there. But just a quick synopsis, right? Go check that one out for a little bit more context. Just push that one even further up the rankings here. But I do think that Tank Bigsby's got potential to work in as the number 2, but I would still be wanting to invest in ETN as my guy for fantasy.
I agree.
Now the only problem is I don't think ETN has a top 10 ceiling like a lot of people out there do, but um, I think that he finished at 17 this
Yeah.
last year as rookie we'll call it, and coming off the list, Frank, that always does take a little bit of extra time to get
It
fully
does.
recovered, but yeah, I think that there's
Yeah, I think overall that he could be a wider or a running back 2, a solid running back 2, which
yeah, high
really
end
isn't.
too, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
it is not a horrible thing, but I know a lot of people were projecting him as a running back 1, and I think that was a overevaluation of his talent.
Right. Right.
I mean, yes, he was good
He
at
can finish there.
yeah.
He only
Well,
had
well,
five touchdowns last year, right, on the whole
right,
season.
right.
So you get that to 10 to 12, and I could easily see him finishing as like RB 8, 7, somewhere in that range.
Right,
But
absolutely.
yeah,
And I do believe he does have some running back 1 seasons in him,
sure.
but
Yep.
I don't think I think he needs to be I think he's a little overvalued for what he's going to provide to you.
Right. Yeah, he's kind of going at his ceiling price, right? And that's the
Right.
danger. Because
Right.
if he
And
doesn't hit
and
that
and and
ceiling, you just instantly lost value.
and then with Peterson being a Andy Reid disciple, in
Committee.
the coaching in the coaching tree. So, I know Andy likes to use his running backs quite a bit, and I
Committee.
think so it's going to be. I really hope that Etienne is the pass catching back, but there's no guarantee. Well, I feel all these guys that are there can do that.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
like he's not. I don't think any. I think Etienne's not special. I should
Right.
say.
Yep, I'm with you there. And I do still like him. I think he's going to be the
Yeah,
most productive for this team. It's just again,
absolutely.
we talked about it. We talked about it with the Indianapolis Colts. Sometimes we just got to be more realistic with these guys. Not
Hmm.
always sunshine and rainbows. It's definitely
Yep.
possible ETN can finish this. But how likely is it that he finishes as RB1 overall? I just don't ever see that as a
Uh,
realistic opportunity, right?
yeah, I don't think it's realistic at all.
um, Now, Tank Bigsby, I do think that he has RB2 kind of value, like low end RB2. And if anything ever happened to ETN, he had the Liz Frank.
A huge bump, yeah.
If he ever tore his ACL or anything like that, I think Tank Bigsby is by far the most talented guy behind, Dearness Johnson. People are talking about him. They only signed him to a 1-year deal. It's not like they're paying him a ton
Hmm.
of money. So give me Tank Bigsby. They took him in the third round. Draft capital matters like nonstop, except for
It does.
Tank Bigsby, I guess, because we don't like him. So, Roshan Johnson, fourth round running backs never matter, except give me Roshan over Tank Bigsby. All right. What? Conflicting messages just based on who the player is. So that's fun. Um, Wide receiver wise, now they do have some good players here. Christian Kirk was the number one guy last year. Now, obviously, they brought in Calvin Ridley, who should theoretically be the number one or at least the two with Christian Kirk. Like these should be the top two guys. But Zay Jones, man, he was sneaky good last year, and
It was.
um, I think that's why they felt comfortable letting Marvin Jones go because Zay Jones was killer. I mean, he wasn't amazing, but he was solid for fantasy. Like in the back half, he never really killed you, but he never really. I mean, there was a couple games he had 3.6, 2.1, 5.4, 6.1, but then in between those, like 36, 22, 29, 15, like you always had a chance for an amazing week with Zay Jones last year, which was crazy. So you like to see that, but again, now he's the number 3 guy, and that's where you really like to see him here. And I think that there's a lot of potential in this offense. How do you view Christian Kirk though versus Calvin Ridley? Which one Christian Kirk finishes
I'm
RB or wide receiver
Yeah.
11 last
I
year
think I would feel more comfortable having Christian Kirk
than
than
Calvin
Calvin
Ridley?
Ridley personally.
Fair,
I like Calvin Ridley's talent, but he hasn't played football in 2 years.
right?
And
Yep,
that is a lot. I mean, he's 29, he's gonna be 29 years old.
right.
And a fun fact, like he's still on his rookie deal, which is
I know it's
a
crazy
fun little nugget. Yeah, it's
because he was a
crazy with
first
him
round pick.
being.
Yeah, this is his
Yeah,
fifth year option.
yeah, yeah. So, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens. And I did read that if he signs a long-term extension, that it's a that they get a third round pick in 24 if they don't re-sign him, but
Right,
if they do, they get a second. Is
right.
what it
Yep,
is.
yep.
Is what the conditions are. But I think Ridley is an interesting stash. I would have rather have gotten him last off season when he was suspended
Right.
and his value was much cheaper.
Yep. I've seen his value
I
all over the board. It's crazy.
Yes,
But I
and
will
I think
go ahead.
I feel the people that are holding him now are wanting to get everything for him.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's all due to the age, right? Because he's going to be
Yes.
29. Um, I will say though, the last time we saw him play, he only played 5 games, but he had 52 targets, 31 catches for 281 yards. Averaging
Yeah.
9 yards
Yeah.
per catch,
Absolutely.
2 touchdowns. He's always been a pretty good touchdown threat. And again, I love this pairing with Trevor Lawrence. If he was I'm with you. I think I'd rather invest in Christian Kirk. I mean, Christian Kirk had 133 targets last year. as the de facto number one guy here. And, I don't think he's necessarily good enough to be the one. I think most teams will treat Calvin Ridley as the one, and it's going to open Christian Kirk up more to be
Absolutely.
more in his um, more natural role. I think that he's still going to have similar target numbers. So you're telling me he's getting a little bit weaker coverage on him, and he's going to get the same number of targets? Okay, yeah, sure. I'm all in for that. So I do like Christian Kirk quite a bit of these two guys. Now, tight end wise, there's not really many guys here. They got Brenton Strange, who they drafted, Sammy Reyes. But then Evan Ingram is obviously the number one guy who they franchise tagged. They have until, I think, next week, a week from today when we're recording. Spoiler alert, it's a little bit early, but by the time you're listening to this, they might have extended him to a long-term contract. But if they don't, it's going to be interesting. What are we thinking about Evan Ingram if they don't sign him to a long-term contract?
Um, I think, I guess history shows us that Evan Ingram loves 1-year contracts.
Yes, he does.
Uh, yeah, I'll be honest because he knows how to play for that money and in the first year of the contract. So I think I would be it depends how long the contract's for because he's gonna be 29 going into the season. And I think I mean tight ends don't age as much as like running backs and potential and kind of wide receivers in a way. So, but Evan Ingram's always been hit or miss. Um, and that I'm just worried that I just don't want him to become an afterthought. Like he hasn't
Right.
had any. I mean, I don't know. Like I would much rather him be on like a shorter term deal, like a 2-year
Sure.
deal or a 3-year deal. I'm worried they're just gonna extend them, have like a 4 to 5 year deal, and I don't think that's smart for them.
Right. Yeah. We'll see if they sign him to anything. But,
Yeah.
the nice thing about Evan Ingram last year, a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, he was so spotty. But I mean, he didn't ever really kill you. Like, you know, okay, obviously he killed you, but he's a tight end, right? Where,
He he
okay,
he he was very solid. Like he had a career high in receptions, receiving yards,
right.
and
Week to week, though, there
and,
were
and
some
yes,
weeks where he killed you, right? Like, just going
yes.
through 7 points, 12, 4, 3, 13, 9, 11, 16, 2, 4, 2, 14, 40. 40 is really nice from tight end. 14, 19,
Hmm.
4, and 7. So, there were some ups, really good ups, some downs, some really bad downs. But again, for tight end, it could have been much, much worse. So,
Oh,
um,
absolutely.
and you like to see what he did in the second half, right? There was the 4 game
Hmm.
stretch there at the end when they were really starting to push for playoffs, where 14 points, 40, 14, 19. So it's like, yes, if you can get that on a fairly semi-consistent basis. Now, them adding Calvin Ridley might hurt this a little bit. I think that
Oh no,
I don't think he's going to have 98 targets. I think it could be more
no.
closer to like 70, and that's where it's a little bit more risky. So, buyer beware with Evan Ingram, but I do think they're ultimately going to come to a contract deal with him. And the one nice thing about Doug Peterson offenses, you always like the tight end option, always like semi-relevant, right? So, again, I think it's going to be probably about the same hit or miss, but I think that there's going to be a couple weeks in there where he's going to just go off absolutely nuts and he's going to win you the week, right? So that's always in his range of outcomes, but it's a little risky.
No, I agree. So other than Evan Ingram, is there anybody that you like could roster as a little sneaky stash or
For the wide receivers or the tight ends?
tight ends?
No,
Okay,
no, I'm not in on Sammy Ray. So, um,
that's fair.
yep. So that's pretty much it. Otherwise, just give me the wide receivers. That's who they really leaned on
Yep,
last year. So.
agreed.
All right. So, any last thoughts on the Jacksonville Jaguars here?
Mm-mm.
All right. So that said, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And let us know again if you have any comments on this, any thoughts, just hit us up in the comments down below. We're going to obviously read those and try and incorporate those. We're going to be doing these kind of videos every single offseason. So, yeah, all feedback is welcome. But yeah, thank you guys again for listening. And until next time, have a good night.